Welcome to episode 331 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak encouragement into the hearts of educators and get you informed and energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking with Rob Barnett, co-founder of the Modern Classrooms Project, about how to individualize instruction without burning out. Visit truthforteachers.com for an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. If you don't want to spend the new school year overwhelmed by the nonstop demands of teaching, I have something that can help. I'm partnering with Rocket PD to offer a new live virtual cohort called Unlocking Teacher Productivity, which kicks off October 2nd. We'll meet Thursdays throughout the month of October 2025 for a total of 5 90-minute sessions. I'll walk you through step-by-step systems to help you prioritize what matters most, cut down on unnecessary work, and finally feel on top of your time. You'll get access to me, the recordings, a downloadable workbook, and a certificate of PD completion, along with a private group for support, all for $4.95 with team discounts available. I designed this experience to be practical and doable, no fluff, just real solutions for teachers. Go to rocketpd.com to learn more about my cohort and others happening this fall. That's rocketpd.com. Have you ever stood in front of your class looking out at your students and wondered how exactly you're supposed to meet the needs of every single one simultaneously? The advanced learners who finished before you could even get done explaining, the students with gaps who are struggling to keep up, the ones who are chronically absent. If you've ever felt like you're trying to be everything to everyone and still falling short, you're not alone. In this week's episode of the Truth for Teachers podcast, I spoke with Rob Barnett, a former high school math teacher and co-founder of the Modern Classrooms Project. Modern Classrooms has empowered 80,000 educators in 180 countries to meet every learner's needs. Before he founded this project, he taught math, computer science, English, social studies, and law from the middle school all the way up to university levels at both public and private schools in the U.S. and abroad. He's the author of Meet Every Learner's Needs, Redesigning Instruction so All Learners Can Succeed, and he hopes that his children will learn in modern classrooms someday. Listen in as Rob and I discuss how self-paced learning can help teachers individualize instruction in a way that's beneficial for kids and manageable for the teacher. So Rob, your new book is called Meet Every Learner's Needs, Redesigning Instruction so All Learners Can Succeed. And in the beginning, you explained that you never set out to redesign instruction, but your students weren't learning. And you were miserable as a teacher because you were working all the time and you were frustrated that there were kids that you still couldn't reach. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's true. And I certainly never thought I would be writing a book either, but here I am. It started about 10 years ago. I was teaching at a big public high school in Washington, D.C., and I was really struggling every day. In my class, I had some students who were on grade level or ahead. They wanted a challenge. They needed a challenge. I had students who had gaps in their learning. They were several years behind at times. They needed more support. They felt lost. And then I had some students who weren't there at all, a big struggle with chronic absenteeism. And I was standing up there at the board trying to give my one lesson per day. And I just realized I cannot meet all of these learners' needs. My advanced students are bored. My students with learning gaps are lost. My chronically absent students are missing out altogether. And I just felt like a failure when I went home because I felt like no matter how hard I work, no matter how good the lesson I plan, it's not going to work when some of my students aren't there or when some of my students have not been prepared to understand this concept. So, I had to find a different way. And what I basically did, to summarize very quickly, is I stopped teaching one lesson to all my students at the same time every day. I digitized my direct instruction by recording very simple videos of myself. I would start a Skype call with myself. I'd explain something, I'd hit record, I'd explain something, I'd stop. That was a video, nothing fancy. I would give those to my students to watch in class or at home. So I spent class time sitting down with them, getting to know them, building relationships. And then I would require that they actually mastered lesson one before they moved to lesson two. I could sit down with a student and say, show me you understand this before you move on. That was so much more fun for me as a teacher. I got to work closely with young people and build relationships. My students felt more relaxed. They felt more comfortable. It really worked. I ended up sharing that with a colleague, Kareem Farah. He and I started a nonprofit to share this with teachers. Now we've shared this with thousands of teachers all over the world, and we have a whole instructional model that I'm sure we'll talk about. But it started really with me just trying to find some simple strategies to address that challenge of teaching that was really getting me down, which is that different learners have different needs and we need ways to meet them all.
Yeah, you're identifying something really crucial there, which is that your advanced learners weren't being challenged. Your below grade level kids were just being completely left behind. And often in those kinds of situations, our response is to try to teach to the middle. And that's something that you address in your book, this idea that teaching to the middle can somehow like replace the individualizing, or that's just sort of our default mode when we're planning our lessons. Can you explain the problems with teaching to the middle and what you found that works better than that?
Absolutely. I mean, when you're delivering one lesson per day to all the students who happen to be in your room that day, you sort of don't have a choice but to teach to the middle, right? If you're
Mhm.
teaching to your advanced learners, then a lot of your class will be totally lost. But if you kind of, teach to students to fill in their gaps, the students who are prepared for your lesson that day are going to be totally bored. So you try to find somewhere in between, but that ends up, in my experience, not really serving anyone. And your
Mhm.
job as a teacher is to challenge those advanced students and support those ones who are behind. So how do you do that? Well, I thought I got to stop delivering the same lesson to every learner every day. I have to make sure that my advanced learners can move on quickly and that my struggling learners have the time they need to really achieve mastery. They're capable of it, but they just need a little bit more time. And so that's why I started doing things like recording videos and sitting down with students in class, because that meant that different learners could be working on different lessons at the same time at their own pace and really building mastery, developing confidence, building the self-esteem that comes with learning. When you're just teaching to the middle, it's hard to do that. And from a teacher perspective can be frustrating too, because you're up at the board, you're explaining something, you know that students are bored, you know that they're lost, like that's so stressful. I
Mhm.
wanted to get out of that situation to a place where I could sit down with my students, get to know them, support them, and make sure that they were all appropriately challenged and appropriately supported every day.
So the idea is that you're creating these short informal videos and students are watching them and then you're providing more support or more challenge based on that according to what students need. Is that right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I might say, for 2 or 3 days at a time, not for the whole year, but for a short window of time, everyone in the class is going to move at their own pace. And here are the things every student needs to do. I call that the must do. Here are some nice should do and aspire to do things for students who are advanced. And during that time, you're going to learn at your own pace, but you'll be able to work with classmates who are going at similar paces as you. I'm not at the front of the room anymore. I'm getting students to work together in groups on similar lessons. I'm sitting down with students. I'm answering their questions. So every student is appropriately challenged because they're moving at their own pace. And I'm able to figure out who needs what and provide that. Sometimes I think there's this conception that when you have technology in the classroom, learning becomes very impersonal and individual. And I haven't really found that to be the case.
Mhm.
I made my videos 5, 10 minutes. You watch them, you close the computer, you find students who are working on the same thing you are. You work together, you work with me. It's really collaborative and human in a way that standing at the front of the room never was for me
Mhm.
or my learners.
Mhm. So the videos then are sort of they are designed for the middle. And then the what you're doing is you're not just leaving it there. You're then providing the accommodations in the way that students are responding to watching and what they're doing after the video.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, oftentimes when teachers talk about differentiation, we think about differentiating in terms of content. So our advanced students get challenging content. Our struggling students get easier content. I never really felt that that was fair because I think every student should have the opportunity to master challenging content, right? If I give my advanced students hard problems and my struggling students easy problems, then the struggling students are never going to have the chance to develop as sophisticated an understanding. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't seem equitable to me. So in my classroom and in modern classrooms, there's differentiation, but it's more in terms of how long students take to work on certain things.
Mm.
Advanced students move quickly, while struggling students have more time. And support. I may have more time to spend with that learner who has gaps, whereas the student who loves math or loves reading just can kind of take off and go on their own. And of course, for your students who are chronically absent, this is like, this is like a godsend for them because they don't come to class and feel like, oh my God, I missed Monday and Tuesday. I'm totally lost. They feel like I can pick up where I left off. My classmates can help me catch up. My teacher can help me catch up. It's a model that I think allows every student the time and support they need to reach a high level of understanding.
Mm-hmm. That's a really important piece with chronic absenteeism on the increase. This model really addresses that. So you're talking about how after students watch the video, they can go meet with other classmates who are working on the same things they are. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the issue of group work and collaboration. Often we have students who don't pull their weight, and someone else is doing the thinking and the learning for them, or a student who will take over the group and leave the other ones out. And, there's all kinds of issues that happen when we bring, humans together into a group to work collaboratively. What advice do you have on that to make sure that every learner is having their needs met and getting to participate in the group?
That's a great question, and certainly in my experience as a teacher and a student, rings true. I mean, I think the best group work occurs when people are working together on a problem where they're all appropriately challenged and can all engage. So if I just give all my students group work at the same time and say, go for it, maybe the students who are advanced will take over and do everything. And the students who have gaps in their learning or struggle won't feel like they can contribute and they'll disengage.
Mm-hmm.
And I've certainly been part of groups like that myself. On the other hand, if students are moving at their own paces and we can create groups of students who are all at the same place in their understanding, it's much more natural for them to work together, right? Because they can, they can support each other in a way that isn't going to happen when you just say, okay, today's project is this. You divide up groups. Some students get it. Some students aren't prepared to get it. You're probably not going to have great collaboration. When every student is appropriately challenged, they really can work together in a productive way. I also just want to say one more thing about chronic absenteeism from a sort of teacher workload perspective. When I had students who were chronically absent before I started teaching this way, what often happened is I had to stay after school to meet with those students and help them catch up. And sometimes they couldn't stay after school, right? They had other things going on in their lives. But that was a big burden on me, honestly, to put in all the time to help students catch up. Once I started teaching like this, it was easy for me to help chronically absent students. When they came back to class, they picked up where they left off, and they could access it outside of class too. So, I had a much easier time dealing with this important issue when I switched the way that I taught.
Mm-hmm. I want to also talk about the self-paced learning piece. A lot of kids struggle with that, and you talk in your book about how to create deadlines at various intervals and other kinds of strategies to help students be successful in these projects. So we're not just giving them the assignment and it just go, and now they're responsible for managing their time and making sure that they're on track. Like, you really build in a lot of supports for that. What kinds of things have you found are useful to help kids be successful in self-paced learning?
Absolutely. I mean, this is another concept that people sometimes have a negative reaction to. Self-paced learning. Do you mean we just let students go on day one and then see you at the end of the year? And of course, that's not what I mean, at least. I think that would not be good for students. Too much freedom is not going to work well for students, but we want to give them some freedom and some autonomy within sort of reasonable bounds. for self-pacing. And so what I did and what I recommend is you say, okay, for 2 days at a time, for a week at a time, you're going to move at your own pace. But then the next interval, the next week, we're all going to start fresh at something new. That accomplishes a couple things. First, it gives students sort of reasonable benchmarks, like, okay, I have 2 or 3 lessons to do on my own, but I can do this. This is manageable. And second, it means that all the students in a class are generally working on the same thing, right? So one student may be a lesson ahead, but they could help a student who's a lesson behind. They're all within the same sort of 2, 3, 5, maybe 10 lesson interval. And the interval you choose obviously depends on your learning. Within each interval, I also encourage teachers to prioritize, right? We know that in a self-paced classroom, some students are going to get farther than others because they have more preparation or they have better attendance or whatever. So within that interval, you have to think, what are the essentials that every student really must do? What things here are maybe optional? We could think of those as things students should do, but if they don't have time, that's okay. And then what are the really exciting things, the aspire to do activities, the extensions that can motivate advanced students to go even farther? So when I had sort of a self-paced interval, I'd say, we're going to go for a week at a time. Here are the 2 lessons everyone must master. Here's a lesson that is really good to do if you get there. And if you get really into it, here's a great, interesting extension activity at the end. That creates a nice balance between freedom and structure for students.
Did you ever have kids who were like, okay, I did the requirements, I did the must do. I don't really want to do the rest of this. Like, can I just stop there?
Yes, of course, that's how people are, and I think that's a risk, and that's understandable. When I had that situation, and I think motivation so often comes from relationships, and so when I saw that happen, I would always try to talk to the student and say, look, you did the minimum. Are you the kind of person who does the minimum, or are you the kind of person who does more and goes farther and learns a lot? And students, when they're challenged in a friendly and appropriate and accessible way, I think they do want to succeed. They do want to excel. So I did encounter that. Sometimes students were okay to get away with the minimum, but I found that once I built relationships, I could usually push them to go a little farther.
Tell me how the grading and assessment piece works. If some students are doing additional assignments or they're working at a different pace, how can teachers use formative assessments or ongoing feedback to figure out what the next steps are and inform their personalization and not feel like they're buried under data and trying to analyze and assess all these different things?
Data can be so overwhelming, right? And I think part of that is because of the data we collect and the kind of insights it generates. So when I was teaching one lesson to all my students every day, I would have an exit ticket. At the end of class, every student would take it. I could predict what would happen, right? Some students would understand the lesson, some students wouldn't, but what was I going to do? Like I had the next lesson to teach the next day. So I had the data, but it wasn't actionable. And then we'd reach the test and I would get all this data at once, but I couldn't really do anything with it because I still had to move on to the next unit. In a modern classroom, we encourage teachers at the end of each lesson, give students what we call a mastery check. And it's just like an exit ticket. It's 1 or 2 short problems, but students only take it when they're ready. So one student might take it at the start of class. Another student might take it at the end of class. That means every student's going to be ready for it when they take it. And as the teacher, when you look at that mastery check, you have a decision to make right there with each student. Is the student ready to move on? So I look at the mastery check and I determine right away, okay, Rob is still struggling. I need to sit with him and help him review. Or Angela's got it. Move on to the next thing. So it's a pretty small piece of data at the end of each lesson that gives a clear kind of action step for each student. You mastered it, you move on. If not, let's go back, let's revise, let's try again. And I now have sort of a clipboard that I carry around the room, which shows which of my students have mastered which lessons. That's great data for me to say, okay, like, Angela, you got it. Rob didn't get it. Rob, can you go ask Angela for help? I have that data. It's not too much data. It's one or two questions per lesson, but it's really actionable and it informs next steps. So I'm always encouraging teachers, having a ton of data is nice, but it may not be that helpful if it doesn't inform your next steps. Collect one or two pieces of information per lesson and use those to determine who sits where, who works with whom, who's doing what today. I think the kind of self-paced, mastery-based environment thrives on that use of data.
Mm-hmm. How many assignments are you giving a formal grade to every week?
This really depends from teacher to teacher because some school districts say you have to grade everything. Some teachers think you have to grade everything. For me, all I graded was that mastery check at the end of each lesson. And then I had unit end assessments, projects or tests. That kept my grading workload, reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
That showed students what I really cared about. I don't really care as a teacher, did you complete 100 homework problems or did you complete 3 or none? What I care is whether you understand the content. So homework, video, all of that was basically practice and preparation for the mastery. I was focused. Did each student understand each lesson? That was the grade. And it meant I wasn't, going crazy trying to grade every single thing that students created or students worked on every day.
There's a chapter in your book about inspiring students to excel and using incentives to push all learners toward mastery. And I really like that because I think a lot of advice given to educators is assuming that, students are supposed to be developing this internal source of motivation and that using any kind of reward or incentive or something is somehow cheating. But that doesn't fit with what we know about how humans work. We don't do things unless there's something in it for us, unless it's meeting some kind of need. So I'd love to hear about what you've discovered about incentives and helping students to push themselves towards mastery.
Of course, I think it's a combination, right? We don't want students just going for carrots and sticks. We want them to develop some kind of internal satisfaction of learning, but it certainly helps to have other things that students use. In my class, I had these mastery checks, and when students passed a mastery check, I wanted them to feel proud. I wanted them to feel that self-esteem of learning, and I wanted them to feel some benefit from that, whether that was the grade or, some teachers have like maybe an ahead of pace area in their classroom where if you are ahead of the suggested pace, you can sit over here, or, you could use your phone in class or something, or maybe they have a badge. Okay. Angela mastered lesson 3. She has the genius badge for a day. Ask her this, recognition. Or you might, send an email home with the data you have to a parent or coach saying, hey, your child did great in class today, and here's the evidence I have to prove it. All of those small sorts of rewards are meaningful for students. You want students to feel like if I sit down and I work hard, I actually can understand this. And so relationships and small sort of perks and recognition, all of these things help students see that they're capable of success. But the most important thing, I think, is giving every student an appropriately challenging lesson and appropriate supports every day. If you have missed Monday and Tuesday's class and you show up on Wednesday, it's going to be difficult for you to succeed in a traditional setting. In a modern classroom, you have the chance to succeed with all of the reward, intrinsic and extrinsic, that can bring.
Mm-hmm. What are some small practical steps that teachers can take to individualize learning without creating an unmanageable workload?
I'm so happy you asked this because oftentimes teachers hear about our model and they say, oh my God, this is complex. This is so much to take in. I can't do it. And it's true that we present this model as a comprehensive sort of approach to teaching. But when I was doing this in my classroom, it was really just as simple of small steps each day that made my life and my students' life easier. One thing I think you can do is record that instructional video. And you don't need a professional recording studio to do this. You open a Zoom call, you hit record, you explain something, you stop the recording, and you share that with your students. That does take time, of course, but once you've done that, you don't need to repeat yourself 100 times the same thing because your students can watch that video. They can rewatch the video. They can pause it. They can watch it at home with their parents. You've created a resource that's going to last as long as you teach. And it means that in class, you can spend your time sitting down with your learners. So a small step like that, recording a video, opens up a lot for you. Another small thing you could do is just create a simple chart on a clipboard that you have and just note when each student has mastered each lesson. That gives you really valuable data that you can use with your students. It's not a fancy data dashboard online. It's a piece of paper on a clipboard, but it has the information you need. So I really tried in the book to emphasize, here are the small, simple things I did. Here are the small, simple things you can do. And once you start doing this, building, one day you'll look at your classroom and say, oh my God, this is amazing what's happening here.
Yeah, I love that idea of just starting small. So let's say that I record this one quick lesson, and instead of going in and teaching it tomorrow, I have my kids watch it. What else do I do? How do I prep them for that? What do I have them do afterwards? How would I begin trying this with them?
These are exactly the questions I wrestled with as a teacher once I had the videos. But in general, I think the modern classroom lesson has 3 parts. The first, I wouldn't start class just by saying, come in and get on your computer. I would always like to have some kind of whole class warm up, build community, get students thinking. Mm-hmm. But then I would say your direct instruction is on a video. That means you can watch in class or at home, you can pause, you can take notes, etc. That's something students usually do individually. Watch the video, take notes, ask questions. After the video, students should close the screens and do some practice together. They should apply what they've learned in the video. If it's a math class, maybe they work on math problems. If it's a social studies class, maybe they, look at a historical document. If it's a Spanish class, maybe they learn the vocabulary in your video, and then they find a classmate to have a conversation with, right? They need to do something together, and that's where most of class should be spent after the short instructional video, working on things to develop understanding together. And then the last element is that individual mastery check, making sure that each student really, when they're ready, has the chance to prove understanding, and then determining the next steps accordingly. So if I were, advising you to do this tomorrow, I'd say, whatever you're going to share from the board tomorrow, share it, this afternoon on a video. Mm-hmm. Go into class, have a warm up, let your students watch the video. Afterwards, find something really meaningful that they can do together to apply what they've learned in the video, and then have some way that each of them can show you when they're ready, I really get it. I understand. You do that enough times, you start to string those sort of self-paced lessons together. All of a sudden, you have a self-paced classroom where students really can achieve mastery every day.
How has your thinking about modern classrooms changed since you first started? I know that when I write a book about something, the final product is always different from what I initially imagined because I'm always still learning new things. And as I really examine my ideas, I dig into the research, I look at the examples, it shifts things for me. And I'm sure that some of your ideas now are different. What's changed for you in terms of what you think is best practice here?
I think one thing that's changed for me is something I've mentioned here, which is about just taking small steps towards better lessons. I think when Kareem and I started Modern Classrooms Project, we had this big grand vision of this is how instruction should be. And you have to have, here are all the elements you want to have in place to have a good modern classroom. And I still feel motivated by that grand vision. But I think in writing the book, what I realized is when I started as a teacher, I didn't have this grand vision. I was just doing small things every day to feel a little happier and support my students. And everything that has come after that is a result of having taken those small steps. So, whereas I used to pitch modern classrooms as this is the solution, right? And just do all these things and your class will be great. Now I'm thinking of it much more as here are some simple things you can do, and they're going to make each day better for you. And, if you can make Monday better and Tuesday a little better than that and Wednesday a little better than that, pretty soon you're going to get to a place where you're really happy with your classroom. So it's important to have a comprehensive model is great, but what I think is really valuable about modern classrooms and which the book helped me see is actually this is just, a series of small steps that you take that leads to a much larger outcome.
It's interesting that you said that because that was actually the impression that I had as I read the book. That you don't have to use the whole model in order to be able to implement what's in the book. Like there's lots of very actionable, practical things and examples from classrooms that a teacher could do right away. There's a lot of things that can slowly shift the way that you teach over time rather than do this big overhaul. So if that was your goal, that definitely came forward in the book because that's how I felt as the reader.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and look, if you're listening to this, you don't have to do anything I say. You may think my ideas are terrible, but I hope there's one thing in here that, helps you use your data a little better or helps you use technology a little better or maybe helps you develop a better relationship with that chronically absent student. It's a bunch of techniques. They've worked for me, they've worked for other teachers, and I hope some of them can, work for your listeners too.
I want to close out with a takeaway truth. What's something that you wish every teacher understood about meeting every learner's needs?
I think what I would say is that um, I think what I would say here is that you should do what you think is best for you and your students. And what works for me may not work for you. It may work a little bit differently. Every student has different needs and every teacher has different needs, different strengths, different personality too. And so I think my sort of truth from my teaching and then speaking with teachers all over the world who have done this is if an approach like this is going to work, you have to make it your own. You have to try it and, experience success with it and struggle with it and make it something that really works for you. If you listen to this and you think this won't work for me, you're right. If you listen to this and you think this is going to work great, you're also right. You need to take this and make it your own and embrace what makes you unique as a person and a teacher. And if you can do that, whether you use my methods or something totally different, I think you'll succeed and your students will succeed as well.
Thank you so much, Rob. This was wonderful.
Thank you. And I know I said this before our call, but I'm a huge fan of what you do. I've been in the 40-hour, teacher work week. I take your AI course. I love what you're doing to make teachers more effective, more sustainable. And so thank you. It's been an honor.